Georgia looks like Georgia again. They are arguably the most talented team in the country. Carson Beck is not a former walk on. Carson Beck makes plays for them. He's developing without his best player on the field. Georgia is modernizing its offense. This is shaping up perfectly for Georgia. I know they are about to face their toughest stretch of the season schedule. Georgia looks to be finding a gear they didn't have without Brock Bowers. That's a sweeping statement. But anyway, everyone should be worried about Georgia because Georgia is starting to look like a really great team. The national championship goes through the Dogs, period. That was Joel Klatt. And his whole point about the walk-on thing is just like people, I think, forgot about Carson Beck, I guess. It's a little bit like the Forgot About Dre song in the late 90s or early 2000s. I can't remember when it was, Ryan. But what do you make of his comments here? Georgia looks like Georgia again. The national championship goes through the Dogs.
They do look like Georgia again. Look, we weren't gonna know 100% what Georgia was at the beginning of the season
Yeah.
with the teams that it had. We knew that it was gonna take a while for us to really learn valuable information about this team. And what we've learned is they've fought through injury. I think they're fighting through expectation, which is a big thing that's over their heads. And in the two biggest games that they've had so far, they dominated. So yeah, I mean, does the national championship run through Georgia? The SEC runs through Georgia right now, but I mean, yeah, the national championship does run through Georgia the last 2 years. Could again. I think he's right. They look like Georgia again, with a slight at Stetson Bennett there, catching a stray.
Well, the way I said it, I think, is probably not the way that he can explain it for himself. That is a direct quote. He's saying Carson Beck is not a former walk on. I think what he meant by that was, this guy has been the real deal the whole time. Like he's not just some guy off the street like Georgia's been using. Not just at quarterback, by the way. They've been using walk-ons in several places.
They went and got
Um,
Stetson off the street.
no, man, Stetson certainly wasn't off the street, man. He was off the streets of Blackshear, if you want to call it that. He was a dynamic playmaker. And I think one thing that Joel was talking about here that is different than when Stetson was there is Georgia's modernizing his offense. Let me expand on that slightly. What people are talking about is, oh, they look different than they did a year ago. Yeah, they're more explosive in the passing game, and we didn't see that the first, say, 2 weeks of the season. But you can see it now, man. I mean, like, they're definitely using the passing game with Carson as the predicate to get them going, Ryan.
They have, and part of why they've had to do that this year is because they're not as healthy as they want to be at running
Yeah.
back. Plain and simple, they've had a hard time keeping scholarship back.
Uh-oh, you froze up. Yeah. When you get there, wait, hold
Against
on. You froze up.
Florida,
Repeat.
I think Dylan Bell,
Repeat
I'm
what you
freezing
were saying.
up.
You froze up for a second there.
Yeah, against Florida, I think that Dylan Bell had a couple carries. Other than that, it was pretty much just Dejan Edwards and Kendall Milton. And in a game like that, where they're crushing a team, usually you'd see a little bit more distribution. You'd see Branson Robinson come in there, and I think he was probably going to be the closer this year that Dejan Edwards was last year, in a way.
I
So
think
they don't have that, and because Carson Beck is talented and they do have the weapons, they're leaning on what their strength is right now.
Yeah, I mean, again, I look at this stuff a lot. Georgia's certainly not an exceptional rushing team because that's not necessarily what they're predicated on. Particularly, they're the number 4 offense in the country. They're the number 8 defense in the country. They're averaging more than 500 yards a game. That's a lot. 500 yards a game, about 40 points a game. They're giving up about 15 points a game.
I'd argue that the offense has been pretty balanced when you look at
Yes,
the
I was
numbers.
just gonna
Yeah.
I was gonna try to rant on that, but my brain works so fast sometimes. You know, when you look at the best rushing offenses in the country, those are a lot of times it is dominated by the academy schools. Not as much as it once was, but Air Force is still number one. And then you look at a lot of these teams. I mean, like Cincinnati is one of the top 10 rushing teams. They're 2-6. UCF, they're 3-5. I mean, just because you're really good at that one thing doesn't mean you're going to be. really good. Now, total offense, I don't think that's unique predictor. Total offense, LSU is number one, Oregon's number two, uh, North Carolina, Georgia, Washington, then UCF, Oklahoma, Liberty, North Texas, and then Texas State. So you do have several top 10 teams in that total offense category, but Georgia and UW as well as Liberty are the only undefeateds in there, and I would argue Georgia is the best of those for sure. Michigan offensively is not doing a bunch of that stuff. We shouldn't really sidetrack on all of these things. I think just globally, Ryan, when you watch the Dogs play, yeah, I mean, Georgia looks like Georgia again. I think they've been looking like that for a little bit of time now. Most of October, they've looked that way, and I think it is they are serving notice right now to me that they're going to be a real problem in the near future.
Yeah, I think that's coming at the right time mentally for the team as well. With the stretch that it has in front of it, being able to get things rolling offensively. Not, but it's not just offensively. And you're looking at the month of October. The of October was dominating Kentucky in all three phases.
Yep.
Probably beating Vanderbilt a little bit better than the box score presents. There's a couple things that happen in that game that happen in games that prevent blowouts.
Correct.
And then
that is the best point.
Yeah. So and then against Florida, they did what they did, and they could beat you in a short amount of time. Georgia can just explode for a quarter and a half, where it just absolutely takes over the game, and most of the time it's too hard to come back from.
You're checking out these EcoPoly 3-piece Villa dining set. It's Christmas time. We're past Halloween. We've got Thanksgiving coming up. Our friends at EcoPoly are making having 20-year warranties on these products they're making in the heart of Georgia. Make sure you're taking advantage of this. 15% off. You got this, what I call it a director's chair, but it's really a what they're calling a Villa chair bar high. These are quality chairs, outdoor living. You're going to use this the rest of your life. Take advantage. There's 15% off. The link is down below, and you're going to get free shipping. It's made in the heart of Georgia by our friends down at EcoPoly. We're very helpful of their support. Support them for us, please. They're very helpful for us. They matter. I think what's going to matter this weekend too, Ryan, is that crowd will matter against Missouri. That will be a real challenge for Mizzou. One thing I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I do want to point out Missouri has had multiple games this season, one against LSU, one against Kentucky, where they've given up 200 yards rushing. And for me, that's like a screaming red flag. Like that's a real problem for them. Comment?
If Georgia can keep it on the ground and do that successfully, that's what they're going to do.
Yep.
They're going to want to get in and out of there. If they can smash the football all over and up and down the field, just run all over Missouri, Carson Beck's not going to have 30 pass attempts if they can do that at a really high level.
And what's so wild about that is if you look at Mizzou, they're one of the top 30 rush defenses in the country. But, I mean, LSU ran all over them, man. Ran all over them. And,
part of that's Jaden Daniels being dynamic. Right? Did he had a pretty big day against them?
There's no doubt. I mean, he didn't have a good day throwing it. But there's no doubt that Daniels, I mean, he's the real deal for sure. But he went for 145, as you were saying, on 15 carries. And then Logan Diggs went for 134. So they were running it even without, without Daniels, although it would be naive to say that he didn't matter a lot because he did. And then, for the Kentucky game, UK went for rushing, went for 218. Like that's a lot. That's too much. And I think if that's what's going to happen Saturday, Missouri's in for a really long night or day, whatever it is.
It will. I think the biggest thing with Missouri is they're going to score some. I mean, I just think the offense is too good not to score, and Georgia's defense has shown that it's really, really good, but it's not invincible. So I imagine that they're going to maybe fly up and down the field a couple drives. They just have so many talented football players on that offense. The real challenge will be to stop Georgia from scoring. in my
Okay.
opinion. And I think that if Georgia hits 30, usually it's safe. And I think it could hit 40 against Missouri.
Yeah, I think it's possible to. I want to just add real quick. Luther Burden is, statistically a top 5 receiver in the country.
I test too. I
Well,
mean,
I test. He's probably number 2 or 3 behind Marvin Harrison, right? I mean, so it's all there for Georgia to defend against. I'm not sure totally. And Neighbors is really good at LSU too. I mean, LSU's got players, but Georgia does too. And I think that's going to be the challenge for.
where's
Um,
Ladd McConkey on that list?
well, Ladd's not played though.
Not too far down, though. Not too far down. Well, statistically, that's not fair to look at, but
Statistically, was what I was talking about.
yeah,
It's Ladd
statistically,
just
it's not
hasn't
fair.
played, but man, you're talking about Ladd as a player being
As
top.
a
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, is he not one of the 10 best receivers in college football? Dude's a straight up weapon. There are some good receivers out there right now, and it's also a position that's growing as far as the number of good players across the board because it's grown in value and the game's changed. But he's up there as one of the best offensive weapons for sure.
So there are 130, I think. I think it's 130 different FBS teams, and yeah, exactly 130. I'm not sure I'm equipped enough to know on the 130 teams who is better than Ladd McConkey. There's not a lot of wide receivers who are better than Ladd McConkey. I'll just say that right now. He is really hard to get. He is really hard to deal with. He's different than Luther Burden and James Harris. He's not a huge menacing presence, like maybe Marcus Joseph Saint is, but it all ties in together. I mean, eventually there will be a Georgia football team that has Marcus, Ladd, Brock, and all of these guys on the field at the same time. You're going to have some challenges there. I mean, think back to how many times, and we'll stop talking. I'll stop talking. Think back like this, Ryan. How many times has Georgia not scored 40 points in the last however many years? They didn't score 40 against Vanderbilt.
Okay,
They didn't
I
score
can
40
run through
against
it real
Auburn.
quick.
They
I
didn't
could
score 40 against South Carolina. Okay. They didn't score 40 against Georgia Tech. They did not score 40 against Kentucky. Okay. So that's about a season right there. They scored 40 against Oregon. They didn't score 40 against Stanford. They scored 40 against Oregon, South Carolina, Auburn, Vandy, Florida, Mississippi State, LSU, Ohio State, TCU. Some of these teams are pretty good teams, and defensively, and then UT Martin, Ball State, UAB, Kentucky, Florida. But it seems like I don't think 40 is out of the question anytime Georgia gets onto the field.
Mm-mm.
Like, who is the best
It's
defense in the
not.
country? Michigan?
We can't know that yet. We don't know enough about Michigan yet. That's the problem. It's the same deal. Their beginning of the season for Georgia, what Georgia had it's much more extended for Michigan, and I don't think we know too much. We do know that they can dominate an opponent they should dominate, and they're doing their job. So that's what we know about Michigan.
So Michigan and Ohio State, and Penn State are all in the top 4 of defenses in the nation. They're all playing one another, so that will be, a real challenge for everybody in that league. Texas A&M and the Dawgs are both up there too in the top 10. Clemson, which has a very good defense but a bad offense. But scoring defense goes Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Air Force, SMU, Iowa, Georgia, Duke, UCLA, and then Notre Dame, and we'll just see. But whereas Ohio State used to be explosive offensively, they're really not that now, but they're much better defensively. Michigan is not the same offense that Georgia is. Even playing sort of these turdy teams that they're playing, that's the problem for Michigan is they don't just light it up, and they're not playing great teams. They're playing adequate teams. East Carolina, UNLV. Like, they go 30, 35, 31, 31. Lately, they play better, 45, 40, 52, 52, 49. What does it say that you're scoring more in conference play than out of conference? What does that say for the Big Ten? I mean, it says to me they're not real good. But Anyway, we'll talk about that more. Joel Klatt seems to think that the Dogs, Georgia is back to being Georgia. We'll find out this weekend.